Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the American Academy of Diplomacy's virtual interview series. I'm your host, Conor McCarty. The purpose of this interview series is to share the professional experiences of Academy members with students and the general public in hopes of supporting the Academy's mission of strengthening appreciation and understanding of U.S. foreign policy. If you haven't already, please follow the American Academy of Diplomacy across all their social media platforms for the latest U.S. diplomacy and foreign policy updates. Today, we are joined by Academy member Ambassador Susan Burk. Ambassador Burk has over 35 years of experience in public service and has focused her career on United States nonproliferation, arms control, and counterterrorism objectives. She has previously served as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Nonproliferation Controls, Acting Assistant Secretary of State in the Nonproliferation Bureau, and the First Deputy Coordinator for Homeland Security and the Office of the Coordinator for Counterterrorism. Most recently, Ambassador Burk served as the Special Representative of the President for Nuclear Nonproliferation with the rank of Ambassador from 2009 to 2012. Ambassador Burk is a graduate of Trinity College in Washington, D.C., where she earned her bachelor's degree, and Georgetown University, where she earned her master's degree. And with that introduction, I would like to welcome Ambassador Burk. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here today.
Of course, and I'm so glad that we could speak with you this morning. I was hoping to structure the interview today around some of your senior positions throughout your extensive career. But to start, I just wanted to first ask, how did you become interested in issues like nonproliferation and disarmament? Was there a specific event or topic that kind of sparked your interest?
Well, that's an excellent question. I started my career in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, working on a range of multilateral issues. I was involved with the Antarctic Treaty, law of armed conflict. I was a very junior officer at the time. I worked with great people. I had some great mentors. And I also got involved with multilateral disarmament issues that were being addressed in the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. And I was then asked to move to another office, and I spent a couple of years working on the INF negotiations, bilateral U.S.-Soviet INF negotiations. And I found that I had a greater aptitude for and a much greater interest in the rough and tumble of multilateral diplomacy, particularly as it pertained to nonproliferation and disarmament. And so I finally had an opportunity to move to the former Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, to work on nonproliferation. And that's where I really found my niche and I found my passion. It was just fascinating work, wide variety of issues. And I won't say that there was any particular issue, but I would say that at that time, the focus really was on superpower arms control, US-Soviet arms control, the INF negotiations, strategic arms control. And the nonproliferation regime was growing and huge, and there were so many issues, and it didn't seem to quite have the attention. And I think partly because things were going fairly well. And so I just thought that was really an area where I could make my mark and I could learn a lot. And I had a much greater aptitude for it, and I had a much greater interest in it. So that kind of stuck.
Awesome, thank you so much. And given your different positions, kind of focusing on nonproliferation, specifically as acting assistant secretary of state for nonproliferation, I was kind of wondering, how were you able to develop and practice your negotiation skills in this position, but also in kind of your various positions in nonproliferation?
Well, I would say that when I moved into the front office of the Nonproliferation Bureau at the State Department, I was asked to serve as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, which was the most senior position I had held up to that point. And I worked for a wonderful man, a member of the Academy, Ambassador John Wolf, who was the Assistant Secretary. And when I came into that office, I'd had about 20 years of experience. And I would say that most of what I learned was from participating on delegations, being a member of a delegation, both representing the Department of Defense or the Arms Control Agency, and watching others. I worked with some incredible delegation leaders and ambassadors who were just extraordinarily skilled. And I think, it's important to observe and pay attention to what other people are doing. Not assume you can do it automatically, because for some people it's a natural, other people it's a learned talent. And I just learned a lot from working with great people. Some were my colleagues who were just very, very skilled. Some were people that I worked for. And so by the time I took that position in the Nonproliferation Bureau, I felt like I had some miles under my belt, and I knew I had a pretty good grasp of the issues. I had certainly had a very good grasp of the nuclear issues when I took that position. And I had been working with colleagues, all over the government and foreign partners. By the time I was asked to assume the acting assistant secretary position, when Ambassador Wolf first went on a detail that he was asked to take by the president, then President Bush, and then when he decided to retire, you don't know what you can do until you're asked to do it. And so I stepped up to that, and I, of course, was working with wonderful people who were, I had Mark Fitzpatrick, who was a career Foreign Service officer, dear friend. He moved up and took my position as an acting. I had the other deputy was, he's still a dear friend, Andy Semmel. We had a great team up there. So we worked together as a team. This was not a, individual sport. It was a team sport. And when I was in that position, I had the opportunity to negotiate the statement of interdiction principles for the Proliferation Security Initiative when I was supporting the Undersecretary for International Arms Control and International Security and Arms Control. And so that was a great experience. That was my time. I was at the table as the US rep with these foreign partners, and we negotiated this very robust statement of interdiction principles. And I think, but I always felt that my career had led me to that point. I had had a lot of preparation. I didn't get dropped in without experience. I had worked very hard and developed skills over the time, again, by watching, by listening, and by practicing.
And was it through these negotiation experiences and working with other people that you kind of gained this appreciation for multilateral diplomacy and just multilateral relations that you kind of mentioned earlier?
Oh, absolutely. And I think over my career, I really came to the very strong conclusion that the problems that we're facing, global problems, whether it's non-proliferation or human health. I mean, we've seen this with the pandemic, or the environment. I mean, there's so many of these, I would say existential issues, and we've certainly seen this with the pandemic. These are issues that cannot be solved or fixed by, one state or a small group of states. It's going to require a global effort. And I believe this very strongly. And that's why I'm an unabashed supporter of multilateral diplomacy. It's difficult. It's very hard to get that many countries to agree on a path forward. And more often than not, they're unable to agree. But we're not going to solve these problems for the globe, for everyone, unless we find a way to work together. The economy is another area too. So I really believe that we have to figure out how to work with many, many other partners in order to make progress on these issues that threaten the globe, whether it's environmental or it's, nuclear weapons or, pandemic health. We have to work together. So it's difficult. It's frustrating. It requires that you be able to juggle a lot of balls in the air, but it takes teams of people. And I think when I've served on delegations, we've had groups of Americans, from the Defense Department and the State Department and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Commerce Department, who come in and contribute to the work of the United States delegation. And we have to work together as a team domestically, and we have to work together as, internationally. So
I was just hoping now to move on to your time kind of working as deputy coordinator for the Bureau of the Coordinator for Counterterrorism. And just given your expertise in both counterterrorism in this office and also your extensive work for nonproliferation, what do you see as the relationship between counterterrorism and nuclear nonproliferation?
Well, I had an opportunity to make a move, kind of make a career move after my time in the front office of the Nonproliferation Bureau. And I moved over to the office of the Coordinator for Counterterrorism to be the first deputy coordinator for Homeland Security. My mission really was to try to bring together all the parts of the State Department in a coordinated effort to work with the new Department of Homeland Security, which was a challenge. But because I had extensive experience in working on weapons of mass destruction proliferation, my first boss there, the first coordinator, asked me to be his point of contact for WMD terrorism. And so I was the point of contact in the counterterrorism office, working with the nonproliferation bureau and the undersecretary at the time on these issues. And on nuclear nonproliferation, the traditional issue was always focusing on encouraging states not to pursue a nuclear weapons program, and you're dealing with state level, actors. With terrorism, we're dealing with, in some cases, we're dealing with state actors with terrorism. On another case, we're dealing with non-state actors. And I think after 9/11, the concern became the threat of a non-state actor acquiring radiological materials, or a bomb, although I think that the chances of acquiring a bomb were much smaller than the risk of acquiring radiological materials, and using that as a dirty bomb. And you could look at this and say, well, why would they want to acquire these materials? They're radioactive, they would kill them. Well, if people are prepared to, become suicide bombers, the risk of dying from radiation, to my mind, wouldn't be a tremendous deterrent. And so that became the concern, about securing materials and being alert to information that would suggest that non-state groups were interested in acquiring materials for like an improvised nuclear explosive device. And so that led to the initiation of the global, it was like a PSI initiative, but was to deal with nuclear terrorism. I was not involved directly in that, but it was the Non-Proliferation Bureau. So that's where they really came together. I think there were issues too of the counterterrorism community really worked on following the money on counterterrorism, trying to see who was funding these groups. And the non-proliferation community began to try to look at that as well. So, there are ways that they overlap, but again, ways where they're distinct, but they both represented serious threats. So I was able to bring my previous expertise to bear in helping the counterterrorism office be part of that effort. There was a National Security Council effort to look at the issue, and I could represent the CT office on that as part of the State Department team.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how a lot of these issues are so interconnected. And I was hoping now that we could talk about the 2010 NPT Review Conference, which is something I'm definitely really interested in because it has to do with the United Nations. So just to start off, I was hoping if you could just maybe briefly explain what the NPT Review Conference is, and maybe just walk us through what your role during that conference was.
Alrighty. Well, the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, by its terms, has allowed for a conference every 5 years of the parties to review the operation of the treaty and to review how well it's working and to make recommendations on actions states should take to implement it, better and that sort of thing. And it's become, these are huge multilateral, I would say it's uber multilateral conferences, because when I started working on this, and I actually worked on the 1985 NPT Review Conference when I first went to the Arms Control Agency, I believe I just did something on this, and I don't have my notes, but I think there were 125 parties. By the time we get to 2010, there are 190 parties. And so again, this is where it's hyper multilateralism. You've got 190 countries coming together, trying to agree on steps, and everyone has different agendas and different goals and that sort of thing. So it's very, very complicated multilateral diplomacy. So 2010 was important, and actually at that time, I had been asked to serve as the special representative of the president for nuclear nonproliferation, and I had been confirmed in that position in June. I think it was Memorial Day weekend of 2009, and the conference was going to be in less than a year. So it was going to be in May of 2010. My role at that point was to was to prepare for the conference after all the preparatory meetings had been held, and to organize the US government, to pull together to participate in the 2010 conference. Now, the good thing, and one of the reasons I was asked to take this position, I'd been involved in 1985, and I also had led all the preparations for 1995 review conference, which made a decision to extend the treaty indefinitely, and that was a multi-year effort that I was involved in. So when I came back to the Nonproliferation Bureau in that position, I was responsible for leading all the preparations, leading all the consultations with foreign partners, and then leading the delegation to the conference in New York, which was held at the United Nations. Now, Secretary Hillary Clinton was the official head of delegation, and she was there on the first day and made our statement. But then she left, and I was the de facto head of delegation. I was the working head of delegation. I was there every day. And for 4 weeks, we had a large delegation, and we had, there were other members of the Academy. Ambassador Laura Kennedy was handling all of the disarmament discussions. Ambassador Glyn Davies was handling all of the peaceful uses discussion. And then we had a very senior career civil servant who was handling, Ambassador Glyn Davies was handling all the safeguards and the regional issues. And then we had a very senior civil servant, Dick Stratford, who was handling all the peaceful uses discussion. So we had an incredible team of people. And then we had all the delegation underneath them. I didn't do this by myself. But I asked these individuals to do this because I knew they were the best of the best and that they would do the best job. So one of the things you learn when you're in these positions is find the best people to work with you, because that's a better way of getting success than trying to do it all yourself. And I learned a long time ago that you can't do it all yourself. So that was basically the role. And I think 2010 was very important because in 2005, the conference had been widely seen as a disaster. It failed to produce any documents. It was very contentious, and it was seen as a failure, just overall a failure. And the review conference process is such that every other conference has been successful. It's produced a document or it's produced something, and people like to leave with a piece of paper or a statement. So 2005 was seen as a bust. And so 2010, there was a lot of riding on 2010. And I would also say that President Obama and his team also had attached a lot of importance to a successful review conference. So I felt that weight as well. And we ended up producing a robust final document, and people were generally happy about it. I'd also say that a lot of what contributed to that was the fact that there was so much enthusiasm about that administration and things that the president had said, his Prague speech and others. And so the administration was striking a very positive tone on the issue of nonproliferation and arms control. And that you can't underestimate the impact of that on the mood of the parties participating. So, there was a lot of hard work that went into it, but also the mood was definitely different, and people were more willing to make compromises than to work. Now in 2015, I had retired by that time, and that failed to produce a document. So now whenever they hold the 2022, which will be the 10th review conference, now it's been postponed from August until January. So it's moving farther and farther away from 2020. There will be a lot of pressure on that conference to produce something because 2015 did not. So that was my role. And I traveled extensively. I went mostly to high value targets, as I would call them, to Geneva, where you could meet with, 25 delegations over a 3 or 4 day period. I'd go to Vienna, I'd go to New York. And then I also did stops in specific capitals. So my time was spent, half on the road, half at home, pulling all the pieces together and all the partners, the domestic partners together, and getting our delegation set for the big event.
Right. And being in such this kind of strong leadership position, are there any kind of lessons that you learned that you think would be valuable to share with students, or maybe someone that's kind of wanting to follow in your footsteps and maybe take on a similar role?
Well, I was I was very fortunate because I was a career civil servant, a career senior executive. I was not a foreign service officer, and many people in the academy are foreign service officers. So I had made my career domestically, and so it was an incredible honor to be asked to take this position with the rank of ambassador as a senior civil servant, and it was an incredible honor to do that. I would say for people wanting to get into this business or any of these areas, it's really important to be open to new opportunities, because you never know, there might be some issue area that you haven't thought about, but if you get an opportunity to work there, give it a try. If you decide that it doesn't do it for you, really don't care for it, or you decide, I just don't have the best aptitude for this, that's not a failure. I think it's as important to know what you don't enjoy doing as what you do enjoy doing, because when you find what you do enjoy doing, you'll know it, and then you'll want to stick with it. I think it's important to listen to people, observe other people, find people that are doing things the way you'd like to do them, because you can learn as much from people. I would always tell people, you can learn as much about management from your bad managers as you can from your good managers, because your bad managers will be doing things you'll say, you know what, if I ever get in that position, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let my people find out what I'm doing from another agency, okay, when I sit around the corner from them. I'm going to be open and as transparent as reasonable. And I'm going to try to build a team, where everybody has a stake in the effort. I think it's really important to be reliable and to be seen as someone with integrity. That if, I always felt that, if you can talk to your partners and they might not like what you say, but they believe you. And I did work for a man when I first went to the Arms Control Agency, Dr. Lewis Dunn, and he could deliver a message, and they might not like the message, but they knew they could trust him that it was true. And I think having a reputation of being trustworthy and reliable is incredibly important. And when you lose that, it's very hard to get it back. So I would think about that whole issue of character, integrity, trustworthiness, reliability for your immediate supervisors, but for anybody else you work with, that they know that you may tell them something they don't like to hear, but they know that you're not trying to fool them, that you're being serious with them. And I always think that, it goes back to the golden rule. I always think it's important to treat people all along the way in your career the way you want to be treated. And inevitably, you will meet people who will not be nice people. They might treat you badly. They might do some really awful things. But I think it's really important to always be the person that when they look at you, they say, yeah, but that's a person he's respectable. I just think that's important, because another thing, you never know who you might end up working for. So don't burn any bridges, because someday that person that you treated terribly might turn up to get a political appointment, and all of a sudden you're reporting to them. So I just think it's just, if you treat people the way you want to be treated, it will come back to you, and that makes for a much better working environment. So I there's lots of advice. Be prepared to work hard. Be prepared to learn from others. I would say, if you can find a mentor in your field, that's a big issue now, is mentoring. I've been mentoring people ever since I retired. I was mentoring people when I was working, but not officially. Find somebody that you can tap into as a mentor, somebody who might stick with you and be there to provide advice and guidance, connect you to other people. Tap into somebody so that you can then keep in touch with folks and get more information. And I think that's what you do, and you build a network. You build a network of people along the way, and it's not too early to do it. And I think your internship here is a great opportunity to begin that network building with professionals who can point you to people that have, who have served in these positions, who are serving now in these positions, and give you advice and guidance and leads on jobs and things like that. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you so much for all that advice. I think a lot of people will find that extremely helpful, especially coming from you and all your experience. And just one other question I had kind of regarding the NPT Review Conference. You mentioned that during this time you were kind of appointed as the special representative of the president for nuclear nonproliferation. What were some of your other responsibilities other than kind of preparations for this conference that you had in this role?
Well, when I came in, and for that whole year, I was just 150% working on the NPT conference. And when it was over and we had accomplished what we set out to accomplish, I was asked to do some work on nuclear weapons free zone treaties. And I had experience with that in the past. There were a couple of nuclear weapons free zone treaties that we were trying to move forward. One of them was the Bangkok Treaty, Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty. It had been negotiated, I'm trying to remember now, 10 years earlier, but there was the provisions in the protocols were negotiated. They consulted with the US and the other weapon states, but they did not take their comments. And so the protocols were unacceptable. We couldn't do that. So I then embarked on an effort with the ASEAN countries. And I was also working with Ambassador Laura Kennedy, who's a member. And we went back and actually successfully renegotiated that protocol to make it acceptable to the United States and to the other weapon states, which was kind of a big deal, to take something that had been already concluded, and, the treaty was, state parties had joined, to reopen the thing and amend it to make it acceptable. Unfortunately, we were about to sign it, and well, I would say the Russians introduced a statement of understanding at the last minute that that made it impossible for the United States to sign it at the time. We were on the verge of signing the protocols, which would have been a really significant deal. I think my successor worked on these as well, and at some point, I hope that we can regroup with our P5 partners and go back and get some of these done. But that was another effort that I worked on at the time. And at the end of the first term, I was asked to stay, but I decided that I was ready to hang up my spurs and do something else. And so I did decide to retire, but it was a busy time. And then there was follow-up from NPT. So it was all good stuff. And I felt like I had come full circle in my career, actually, starting, in nonproliferation with the Nonproliferation Treaty after I left the Pentagon, and then coming back to the Nonproliferation Treaty. And it just seemed to be the perfect, circle of life. And I was back to my first love, and it worked out. And so I thought I didn't want to push my luck.
Well, thank you so much for sharing kind of all these different points of your career. I thought, well, looks like we have time for maybe one more question. So maybe we can just give some more advice to students. So I was thinking for students maybe looking to have a similar career focus on nonproliferation and disarmament like you, how do you predict the global nuclear nonproliferation regime to look in kind of the near future? Do you expect it to maybe be under more or less stress than kind of during your career?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not big for predicting. I would say that for the foreseeable future, I think the challenges that we see out there are going to still be there. Right. So I think there is much important work to do. Okay. When I first started with this, I mean, we had a South Africa that had a clandestine nuclear weapons program. It eventually went clean with it, went public and dismantled its weapons and was, but it was a clandestine nuclear weapons program. You had Argentina and Brazil, who were considered threshold states. They weren't parties to treaties. They did not have full scope safeguards. They had nuclear weapons ambitions. Now, all three of them are parties to the NPT, and all three of them are parties to the nuclear weapons free zones in their neighborhood, the Latin American free zone and the African free zone. And they've all become leaders to some extent. Argentina, well, an Argentine diplomat is now the Director General of the IAEA. South Africa became quite a force in the non-aligned movement in the developing world as a force for good, because they had they put the genie back in the bottle, and then they were doing that. But now you've got North Korea, which continues to be a challenge, a severe challenge. You have India and Pakistan that are not parties to any treaties, but both have nuclear weapons and a history of hot wars. And the challenge is, how do you bring them closer in alignment with the nonproliferation regime? What can you do with that? And I think you have Iran and other countries in the Middle East continues to be a challenge. So I don't see the challenges going away. I see in many ways them getting more difficult and requiring some great minds. The other thing that we're missing right now is, even in the coldest days of the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union could always work together on nonproliferation. They could set aside their differences and have a no bad words, agreement, and they would work together on NPT conferences. And as that relationship has deteriorated, it has become more difficult to find common ground on nonproliferation. And I think if you read the records of the 2015 review conference, the Russians were doing things to make it difficult, where in the past we would have found a way to work together. In 2010, we did work together. So I think a lot is going to depend on how that US-Russian relationship develops, because together we can do a lot of good for nonproliferation. When we're at odds with each other, it makes it much more complicated. So I would say, if you're interested, if anyone's interested in getting into this field, I think that there'll be work for a good long time, and it'll be work in the area of on proliferation, on safeguards, export controls, the wide variety of issues, the peaceful uses, trying to make sure that nuclear energy is used in a safe and secure way for peaceful purposes. Physical security, which became a big issue. That was the nuclear security initiative that the Obama administration started, trying to encourage countries to secure their radiological sources so they would not be susceptible to theft or misuse by non-state actors. So there's just a lot of work to do. And there's a lot of work to do still in the arms control area and in the disarmament area. So I just, we make, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But I'm optimistic, because I think you can't be in this business unless you have some level of optimism. You have to believe that in the end, what you're working towards is going to make things better. And in the end, everyone will be better. And I do think multilateral solutions are going to be the way we really make progress on these issues.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much again for taking the time to interview with us today. And, we really appreciate all of your insight, as well as the advice that you've been able to give to students and those that are looking to follow in kind of similar footsteps as yours.